I was sitting in my doctor's waiting room when my daughter called and destroyed my entire life in 14 seconds. Mom, Angela said coldly, Edward and I are leaving for Europe tomorrow. I smiled automatically. God. I actually thought she was calling to ask if I needed groceries. Then she said, "Oh, and I already sold your beach house and Robert's truck. We needed the money." Silence. The entire world went silent. Around me, people kept flipping through old magazines. A baby cried somewhere near reception. The television played a cooking show no one was watching. And meanwhile, my daughter had just erased 45 years of love with one phone call. "Angela," I whispered. "What?" Her voice stayed calm, almost irritated. "As your power of attorney, I handled everything already. We gave you 30%, so don't start acting dramatic." 30% of my own life, God. I gripped the plastic chair so hard my fingers hurt. "That beach house belonged to your father. We needed the money, Mom." Needed, interesting word. Because somehow people always need things most desperately when spending someone else's memories. "In Robert's truck?" I asked quietly. "That old thing, Mom, please." It was practically falling apart. Falling apart. God, that truck still smelled like my husband's cologne. He washed it every Sunday for 20 years. After Robert died 6 months earlier, sometimes I would sit inside that truck just to feel close to him again, and my daughter sold it like old furniture. "Anyway, our flight leaves tomorrow morning," Angela continued. "We'll probably stay in Europe for at least 6 months." At least 6 months. Interesting, so she planned to abandon me immediately after taking everything. "I'll call when we get settled," she added casually. "Bye, Mom." Then she hung up just like that. No apology, no hesitation, no guilt. God. I sat there staring at my phone for so long the nurse had to call my name twice. But strangely, I didn't cry. That was the terrifying part. Because honestly, I should have collapsed right there in that waiting room. Instead, something inside me became very calm, very quiet, very clear. And suddenly, for the first time since Robert died, I remembered the envelope. 3 days before his heart attack, my husband had handed me a thick manila envelope while sitting at our kitchen table. "Antonia," he said softly, "if something ever happens to me, open this only when you truly need it." I had forgotten all about it after the funeral. God, grief makes your brain stop functioning normally. But now I could suddenly see that envelope perfectly in my memory, hidden inside my bedroom dresser. Waiting. The nurse finally called my name again. Inside the office, the doctor smiled kindly. "Your blood pressure is a little elevated," he said. "But overall, you're doing very well for 71. Interesting. Because according to my daughter, I was apparently fragile enough to lose control of my entire life. I nodded politely while barely listening. My mind stayed fixed on that envelope, on Robert, on Angela's cold voice. And honestly, on one horrifying realization, my daughter didn't think she was hurting me. She thought I was powerless. That realization changed everything. When I left the clinic, I sat by the bus window watching the city pass slowly. Couples holding hands, people carrying groceries, children laughing outside a bakery. Normal life continuing while mine quietly collapsed. And yet, deep down, something told me this story wasn't ending the way Angela expected. Because my husband had never been a careless man, Robert planned everything, every bill, every repair, every investment, every emergency. God, the man labeled spice jars alphabetically, and suddenly I couldn't stop wondering what exactly had he left inside that envelope. When I finally got home, the house felt colder than usual. Empty, too quiet. I walked straight to our bedroom without even turning on the lights. Then slowly I opened my dresser drawer, and there it was. The manila envelope. Exactly where Robert left it. My name written carefully across the front in his handwriting. For Antonia. My hands trembled slightly as I sat on the bed. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the room. God. For 1 second, I almost couldn't open it. Because some part of me knew, whatever waited inside that envelope was about to change everything I believed about my marriage, my daughter, and myself forever. What I found inside that envelope nearly stopped my heart. At first, I thought they were just old paperwork, property documents, bank statements, business certificates. But then I saw the numbers. God, the numbers. My hands actually started shaking. I grabbed my glasses from the nightstand and looked again because surely I was reading it wrong. Millions, not thousands, millions. and beneath the documents sat a handwritten letter from Robert. My dearest Antonia, the second I saw his handwriting, tears finally filled my eyes. Not because of the money, because suddenly it felt like my husband was still protecting me even after death. I unfolded the letter carefully. If you are reading this, it began, then something has happened and our daughter has probably disappointed you. I froze. God, Robert knew. Somehow he already knew. The letter continued. Over the years, I quietly invested our savings into properties and businesses. I never told you because I wanted our life to stay simple and because I feared what money might do to Angela. I couldn't breathe properly anymore. There were deeds to 6 properties. 6, including a small motel near the coast, 2 rental homes downtown, investment accounts, shares in 3 companies, and then the sentence that changed everything. The apartment building where Angela and Edward live belongs to us too. Silence, complete silence. I stared at the page for several seconds trying to process the words. Angela's luxury apartment. The same apartment she constantly bragged about online. The same apartment she acted superior from, belonged to me. God, I actually laughed. A strange, quiet laugh. Because suddenly the entire situation became almost poetic. My daughter stole from the woman who secretly owned the building she lived in. Robert continued. I placed everything under Robert Investments Incorporated. You are the sole owner now. My eyes moved across the financial statements again. Bank balances I never knew existed. Investment accounts worth fortunes. Rental income, business profits. For 40 years, I thought my husband was simply a careful bus driver. Meanwhile, he had quietly built an empire. And somehow, I never knew. I looked around our bedroom slowly, the old furniture, the faded curtains, the tiny television Angela always mocked. God, we had lived modestly by choice, not because we were poor. And suddenly I understood why Robert kept it hidden, because money reveals people. It doesn't change them, it reveals them. My daughter thought I was weak because she believed I had nothing. And honestly, that realization hurt worse than losing the house. I kept reading. You always saw the best in people, Antonia, Robert wrote. But I learned long ago that some people only value what benefits them. My chest tightened painfully. Because now I could hear Angela's voice again perfectly. We gave you 30%. 30%. Like I was some helpless old woman lucky to receive charity from her own child. God. I stood up abruptly and walked toward the kitchen because suddenly I couldn't sit still anymore. Everything in my life looked different now. Every conversation, every fake smile. Every moment Angela acted impatient while helping me after Robert died. It wasn't kindness. It was management. She thought she was preparing to inherit a poor widow's leftovers. Instead, she accidentally robbed one of the wealthiest women in the city. Interesting mistake. I poured myself tea with trembling hands and sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I spent 45 years together. And honestly, for the first time since his funeral, I felt him beside me again. Not physically, strategically, like he had seen this moment coming from miles away. Then suddenly another detail hit me. The beach house sale. Angela sold it illegally. Because according to these documents, she never owned anything. Not the house, not the truck, not the apartment she lived in. Nothing. God, my daughter committed fraud without even realizing it. I stared out the kitchen window into the darkness. Then slowly, very slowly, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time since Robert died, I was no longer powerless. And Angela had absolutely no idea. The next morning, Angela called again. And this time, her voice sounded sweet. God, that should have been my first warning. Mom, she said softly, I wanted to check on you. Interesting, because 24 hours earlier she stole my life without hesitation. Now suddenly she cared about my emotional well-being. I'm fine, I answered calmly. Good, we already transferred your portion from the sales. Your portion, God, the audacity. I stirred my tea slowly while staring at Robert's documents spread across the kitchen table. According to my daughter, I was now surviving on leftovers from my own property. How generous, I whispered. What? Nothing, sweetheart. I could hear Edward talking in the background, laughing, planning something, probably Europe. Probably restaurants and hotels funded by my memories. We sold the beach house quickly, Angela continued. We could have gotten more later, but we needed immediate cash. Needed, always needed. I looked toward the framed photo near the window. Robert smiling beside that old beach house grill. Angela as a teenager covered in sand laughing beside him. God, 40 years of memories reduced to quick cash. In Robert's truck, I asked quietly. Oh, Mom, stop obsessing over that old thing. Old thing. Interesting. That old thing was the last object my husband touched before he died. But apparently sentiment becomes inconvenient when greed arrives. We'll help you find something smaller when we get back from Europe, Angela added casually. Smaller? God, my own daughter had already decided my future for me. A smaller life, a smaller home, a smaller existence. All while secretly living inside my apartment building. The irony almost made me dizzy. When do you leave? I asked calmly. In a few hours. Interesting, so she planned to disappear before consequences could arrive. Smart. But not smart enough. We love you, Mom. There it was. The performance line, the sentence people use when they need to feel less guilty about cruelty. I smiled softly despite myself. Have a safe trip, Angela. The second she hung up, I started laughing, real laughter. The kind that surprises even you, because honestly, the situation had become absurd. My daughter believed she had destroyed a helpless widow. Meanwhile, I was secretly richer than everyone she knew. God, if Robert were alive, he would have called this poetic justice. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing every document carefully. Robert had organized everything perfectly. Property ownership, corporate structures, legal protections. The man prepared for war like he was organizing grocery receipts, and buried inside the paperwork, I found something fascinating. Angela and Edward's luxury apartment. Not only did I own the building, Edward had taken loans against the apartment using fraudulent collateral. My eyes widened immediately. God, that idiot didn't even know he wasn't the owner. Which meant eventually the banks would discover everything. And when they did, disaster. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Interesting, very interesting. Because suddenly I didn't need revenge at all. Life was already preparing it for me. That evening, I called the attorney listed inside Robert's documents. Mr. Peterson speaking. My name is Antonia Brooks. Silence. Then immediately, Mrs. Brooks. I've been expecting your call. God, even that had been arranged. I closed my eyes briefly. Robert told you about me? Your husband prepared instructions years ago, Mr. Peterson said carefully. If you ever contacted me, I was to help you recover everything. Recover, interesting word. Because suddenly I realized something painful. Robert anticipated betrayal long before I did. I need to understand exactly what my daughter did illegally, I whispered. There was a pause, then softly. Mrs. Brooks, your daughter committed serious fraud. God, hearing it out loud hurt differently, not because I didn't know, because it made everything real. The beach house sale can be reversed immediately, he continued. And if necessary, we can pursue criminal charges. Criminal charges against my own daughter. I looked down at my wedding ring quietly. 45 years beside one man, all for this ending. No police, I said finally. Are you sure? Yes, because honestly, I didn't want Angela destroyed. I wanted her awake. There's something else, Mr. Peterson added carefully. Your husband left very specific instructions regarding Angela. I frowned slightly. What kind of instructions? Silence lingered briefly. Then, he believed one day she might need to lose everything before understanding what truly matters. God, I suddenly felt chills run down my arms. Because somehow, even after death, Robert was still 3 steps ahead of everyone. For the next 3 weeks, I became 2 different women. To the world, I was still the poor abandoned widow whose daughter ran away to Europe after selling everything. But secretly, I was reclaiming my entire empire piece by piece. And honestly, the double life became strangely satisfying. Every morning I watered my plants while neighbors gave me pitying smiles. Poor Antonia, they whispered. Imagine being left alone like that. God, if only they knew. Aurora from next door brought me soup twice that week. Sweetheart, if you need groceries, just ask, she said gently. I smiled politely. Meanwhile, I owned 7 properties and enough investments to buy half the neighborhood. Interesting experience. Watching how differently people treat you when they think you're powerless. Mr. Peterson handled everything quietly. The beach house sale was reversed first. The buyers got their money back immediately after learning the sale was fraudulent. Apparently, Angela told them I was mentally declining and needed urgent financial management. God. That one hurt more than I expected. My own daughter used my grief like a business strategy. Then came the truck. Robert's beautiful old Ford pickup. The buyer turned out to be a decent man. Once Mr. Peterson explained the situation, he agreed to return it. The afternoon it came back, I stood in the driveway crying silently, because when I opened the driver's door, Robert's scent was still there. God. I actually rested my forehead against the steering wheel for a full minute. 45 years married to one man leaves traces everywhere. That truck felt like touching a ghost. But the most interesting discovery came later: Edward's debts. Mr. Peterson arrived one evening carrying a thick folder. "Mrs. Brooks," he said carefully, "your son-in-law is in serious trouble." I poured tea quietly. "How serious?" "Over $200,000 in loans." My eyebrows lifted immediately. God, 200,000. Apparently Europe wasn't funded by romance, it was funded by fraud. He used the apartment as collateral for several loans, Mr. Peterson explained. But legally, he never owned the property. Interesting, very interesting. So eventually the banks will discover everything? Yes. And Angela, Mr. Peterson hesitated. She may be legally tied to some of the debt. That stopped me cold, because suddenly this wasn't just karma anymore. My daughter was drowning beside the man who manipulated her. I looked out the kitchen window quietly. The sky had turned dark blue with evening rain beginning softly outside. God, I wanted to stay angry, I truly did, but motherhood is horrifying sometimes. Because even after betrayal, part of your heart still panics when your child suffers. "She doesn't know any of this yet?" I asked quietly. "No," I nodded slowly, then after a long silence, "Keep watching Edward." Mr. Peterson studied me carefully. "You still intend to help her eventually. Interesting. Not a question, an observation. She's my daughter." "Yes," he said softly, "but you're no longer blind." God, that sentence stayed with me long after he left, because honestly, he was right. For 45 years, I confused sacrifice with love. I believed good mothers constantly rescue everyone, but maybe real love sometimes means letting people face consequences first. A week later, everything collapsed exactly as expected. Aurora practically ran across the street toward my porch. "Antonia, did you hear?" Interesting. Neighborhood gossip traveled faster than the internet. "Hear what? Angela came back from Europe." I blinked slowly. "Already?" Aurora lowered her voice dramatically. "She came home alone." God, there it was, Edward abandoned her. I felt the realization immediately before Aurora even confirmed it. "They say he ran off with another woman in Paris," Aurora whispered. "And apparently there was never any business opportunity at all." Interesting. So Angela destroyed her family for a man who was scamming her the entire time. Poetic, cruel, but poetic. That night Mr. Peterson called again. "Mrs. Brooks, your daughter received the eviction notice." Right. Because technically Angela was illegally living inside MY building. Silence settled between us briefly. Then softly he asked, "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I closed my eyes slowly. God. No mother dreams of evicting her own child, but no daughter should ever feel entitled to destroy her mother either. "Yes," I whispered finally, because Angela didn't just need saving anymore, she needed awakening. Angela showed up at my front door 2 nights later. At midnight, God, the second I opened the door I barely recognized her. Her mascara was smeared, her expensive coat looked wrinkled. And the confidence she normally carried like perfume? Gone, completely gone. "Mom," she whispered. Interesting, no attitude this time, no superiority, just fear. Behind her sat 3 expensive suitcases on the porch, and honestly, that image alone nearly broke my heart. Because no matter what she had done, she was still the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "What happened?" I asked quietly. Angela started crying immediately. Real crying, the ugly, uncontrollable kind. "Edward left me." There it was. I stepped aside silently and let her inside. The house smelled like cinnamon tea and rain. For a second, Angela just stood there looking around like she hadn't been inside properly in years. Interesting. Because suddenly the home she once looked down on felt safe again. "He stole everything," she whispered shakily. "The money, the accounts, all of it." God, poetic. The woman who stole from her mother got robbed by her husband. Life really does have a dark sense of humor sometimes. I handed her tea quietly while she sat at the kitchen table trembling. The same kitchen table where Robert once warned me, money reveals people. And honestly, he had been right about everyone. I didn't know about the debts, Angela whispered. I swear I didn't. I believed her. That was the worst part. Because for the first time since all this started, my daughter looked genuinely human again, not greedy, not arrogant. Just broken. The bank froze our accounts in Paris, she continued. Then Edward disappeared. God, I stared at her carefully. This woman spent months treating me like a helpless burden. And now she looked exactly like I did after Robert died. Lost, terrified, alone. Mom, please help me. There it was. The sentence every wounded mother waits for, not because we enjoy it. Because deep down, we desperately want our children to finally understand vulnerability. I sat across from her quietly. Why did you sell the beach house? Angela looked down instantly. We needed money? No, my voice stayed soft, but truthful. You wanted status. Silence. Tears rolled down her cheeks again. Interesting, pain finally made honesty possible. Edward said we deserved more, she whispered. He said you were wasting your life living small. God, that hurt more than I expected. Because suddenly I realized something horrifying. My daughter pitied me. All those years she looked at my quiet, simple marriage and thought it was failure. Meanwhile, Robert and I were happier than wealthy people twice our age. You thought I was weak, I said softly. Angela covered her face, crying harder. I thought you were scared. Interesting difference. Because peaceful people always look weak to greedy people. I stood slowly and walked toward Robert's old photograph near the bookshelf. You know what your father understood that you never did? Angela looked up shakily. He understood enough was enough. The room fell silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows again. God, even the weather sounded sad tonight. I thought money would finally make us important, Angela whispered. There it was, the real wound. Not greed, insecurity. My daughter spent her entire life feeling less than rich people, and Edward weaponized that insecurity beautifully. You already were important, I whispered. She broke completely after that, full body sobbing. The kind that comes from years of emotional exhaustion finally collapsing all at once. And honestly, I almost hugged her immediately, almost, but then I remembered the beach house, the truck, the lies, the fraud. Love without accountability destroys people. I learned that too late with Angela. You can stay here tonight, I said quietly. Relief flooded her face instantly. But tomorrow, I looked directly into her eyes. We start telling the truth about everything. Her breathing hitched. Everything? Yes. God, for the first time in her life, my daughter looked terrified of honesty. The next morning, Angela looked 10 years older. God. Pain changes people fast when comfort disappears. She sat silently at my kitchen table wearing one of my old sweaters while staring into untouched coffee. No makeup, no expensive jewelry, no performance, just exhaustion. And honestly, for the first time in years, I could finally see my real daughter underneath all the arrogance. I barely slept, she whispered. Interesting, neither did I after Robert died. But grief and consequences are very different kinds of sleeplessness. I placed a stack of documents carefully in front of her. The beach house papers, truck ownership, bank transfers, property records. Angela frowned in confusion at first, then slowly her face drained of color. Mom, her voice cracked instantly. What is this? I sat down across from her calmly. The truth. She flipped through the pages faster now. And then she saw Robert Investments Incorporated. God, I watched the exact moment her entire understanding of reality shattered. These properties, her breathing became uneven. The apartment building? Yes. Silence. Absolute silence. Angela looked physically dizzy. You own all of this? No, I glanced toward Robert's photograph softly. Your father built all of this. Tears filled her eyes immediately. But we weren't rich. Interesting. That word again, rich, as if peace, stability, and love meant nothing beside luxury. We were wealthy, I corrected gently. There's a difference. She stared at me speechless. God. My daughter spent years chasing appearances while never understanding true security once existed in her own home already. Edward said, I know what Edward said. I leaned back quietly. He convinced you simple meant weak. Angela started crying again. I thought you were lonely. That one nearly broke me, because honestly, after Robert died, I was lonely, but loneliness is not the same thing as failure. He made me feel embarrassed about our life, she whispered shakily. The old house, your clothes, Dad's truck, God. 45 years of beautiful, ordinary love reduced to embarrassment by people obsessed with status. I opened another folder slowly, then slid it toward her. What's this? She whispered. The total amount you illegally sold. Her hands trembled immediately. The numbers looked unreal written together: beach house, truck, accounts. Unauthorized transfers? Angela covered her mouth. Oh my God. Yes, tears spilled down her cheeks rapidly now. I didn't know it was fraud. Interesting, because ignorance always arrives after consequences. You signed papers claiming I was mentally unstable. Her face collapsed instantly. Edward told me it was temporary. God, that sentence made my stomach turn. Temporary betrayal, temporary lies, temporary destruction. People always minimize cruelty once they're caught. I trusted him, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. No, silence. You trusted the version of yourself he created. That landed hard, because suddenly Angela stopped crying. Not from calmness, from realization, and honestly, that realization hurt her more than Edward abandoning her ever could. You became someone your father would never recognize, I whispered softly. God. The pain on her face after hearing that, I almost regretted saying it. Almost. Then quietly she asked, Are you going to press charges? Interesting question, because finally she understood the seriousness of what she'd done. I looked down at my wedding ring slowly. Robert loved Angela more than anything, even when he worried about her, even when he saw flaws I ignored. No, I answered finally. Angela burst into tears again, relief this time. But I raised my hand gently. I'm not saving you from consequences anymore. Her crying stopped instantly. What does that mean? It means you're going to repair every single thing you destroyed. The room went silent. You're going to work. You're going to repay what can be repaid. You're going to stop pretending appearances matter more than character. Angela stared at me quietly, and for the first time in years, my daughter looked ashamed instead of defensive. Interesting difference? Then softly, almost like a child again, she whispered, Do you think Dad hated me before he died? God, that question shattered my heart completely. Because beneath all the greed, all the arrogance, all the betrayal, was still a daughter desperate to feel loved. I walked slowly toward Robert's photograph near the fireplace. God. Even after all these months, sometimes I still expected him to walk into the room carrying groceries or complaining about traffic. Funny how love lingers inside ordinary moments. Angela sat frozen at the kitchen table waiting for my answer. Do you think Dad hated me before he died? Such a heartbreaking question, because no child asks that unless they already fear the answer. I picked up Robert's framed photo carefully. Your father never hated you, I whispered. Angela started crying instantly again. He was disappointed sometimes, I continued softly. He worried about the choices you were making. I smiled sadly at the picture. But your father loved you so much it scared him. God, that was the truth. Robert saw Angela's hunger for status years before I did. But beneath the worry, he adored her completely. He used to stay awake at night talking about you, I whispered. He was terrified the world would convince you that money mattered more than character. Angela buried her face in her hands. And honestly, watching my daughter finally understand her father's fears felt almost unbearable. He left all of this protected because he hoped one day you'd learn the difference between looking wealthy and actually being secure. Silence filled the room softly. Rain still tapped against the windows. Interesting, storms always seemed to appear whenever our family changed forever. I failed him, Angela whispered brokenly. No, I sat beside her carefully. You failed yourself. That landed differently. Not cruelly, truthfully, because honestly, Edward didn't create the greed inside her. He simply fed the insecurity already living there. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Angela looked at me with swollen, exhausted eyes. What happens now, God? That question carried the weight of an entire ruined life. And honestly, for the first time since Robert died, I finally knew the answer. You rebuild, she stared at me quietly. But this time, honestly, I reached into the drawer beside the table and pulled out a small envelope, Robert's final envelope, the one hidden beneath all the financial papers. I almost forgot this existed, I whispered. Angela frowned slightly. What is it? I don't know. Together we opened it carefully. Inside sat a single handwritten letter from Robert, only 3 sentences. My hands trembled reading them aloud. Antonia, if Angela ever comes home broken, help her become stronger, not more comfortable. And Angela, if you are reading this, it means life finally taught you what I could not. God. Angela completely collapsed after that. The kind of crying that comes from years of emotional blindness suddenly ending all at once. I wrapped my arms around my daughter for the first time in months. And honestly, she felt small again. Not greedy, not manipulative, just human. 3 years later, Angela worked 2 jobs while quietly rebuilding her life from scratch. No luxury brands, no fake wealthy friends, no pretending. Interesting transformation. Pain humbled her faster than love ever could. Eventually, she started managing one of Robert's rental properties. And honestly, she became surprisingly good at it. Because for the first time, she respected money instead of worshiping it. As for me, I kept living in the same little house everyone once pitied. The same garden, same kitchen, same peaceful mornings, because Robert was right all along. Enough really is enough. Sometimes people think wealth means escaping ordinary life. But honestly, the greatest luxury in the world is peace. And after everything that happened, peace was the one thing I finally refused to give away again. Before you go, comment below, do people appreciate simple love too late after chasing the wrong things? And remember, the people who truly value you will never make you feel small for living peacefully.